William Upton sitting to my right, now deputy, but has been chairing this committee, and is attending today. So first of all, can I deal first with apologies for absence, and then deal so Town Clerk, we've received some apologies for absence.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So apologies have been received from John Weston, Liz Andrews and Helen Payne. Thank you. No problem. Thank you.
But we've got your apologies.
Are there any more I should be aware of?
No.
Seeing none, thank you. Move on to item 2, declarations of interest. I haven't seen any, Chair.
I'm not aware of any. Just although it's not on the agenda, a couple of minutes. Can I just welcome Susanna Bear? Is she here? Yeah. Susanna, and I'm going to take Susanna out of order. Well, going to introduce her into the agenda and take her first, if I may, after we've dealt with the other procedural points, which are the minutes and the appointment of the Mansfield Conservation Area Advisory Committee representative. And then Susanna, I think I'll take you then. But I just wanted to flag up, Susanna is our new fundraising officer, and she's just going to say a little bit about that. So can we then we'll come on to that in a moment, but deal with the minutes. And the next item is to agree the public and non-public summary of the consultative meeting held on the 16th. I wasn't there, so I can't offer a view, but I've had no indications that anyone's unhappy or has any amendments to them, and I don't think the Town Clerk's Department has either. So those are to be agreed. And then we just are to note the draft minutes and non-public summary of the Hampstead Highgate Queen's Park Committee held on the 21st of October 2025, and that's just for noting. Now I'm delighted to welcome and put to the committee an appointment of a representative from Mansfield Conservation Area Advisory Committee. And can I, Town Clerk, please?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, this is a report for information on the appointment of a representative from the Mansfield Conservation Area Advisory Committee. So Alan Stein, the previous member nominated by the Mansfield Conservation Area Advisory Committee and Neighbourhood Association Committee, stepped down as a representative on Hampstead Heath Consultative Committee in February, and a vacancy was available which the Mansfield Conservation Area Advisory Committee and Neighbourhood Association Committee expressed a desire to fill, and they've nominated Dr. Victoria Holt. So this report is for information for the Consultative Committee and for decision for the Hampstead Heath, Highgate Wood and Queen's Park Committee. Thank you.
So this is just for us to be consulted on. I don't know if anyone has any views that they would wish to indicate to the main committee, but on the face of it, she looks very well qualified and will be an asset to the committee. Any comments from anyone? No. Okay, that's good. If we can move then to a new item 5, and that's to introduce Susanna Bear. Are you going to do that, or I will just introduce you, Susanna? I think I already have, so over to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. So I'm Susanna Bear. I am the new head of development and partnerships. I've been here 2 months. I'm overseeing, leading on events, volunteering and communications.
Sorry, not fundraising. Sorry.
That's okay. No, but also very importantly, we'll be leading on the fundraising effort across North London open spaces. So look forward to hearing from you this evening and working with you in the future. Thank you.
It's very welcome to have you, Susanna, and the first time we've met in 3D. We met on Teams, and obviously it's the first time I think we've had an appointment with any officer who has a fundraising background and dedicated fundraiser. So that brings us on, I think. Oh yes, yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I had a point.
I'm no longer sheriff, sadly. Anyone, yeah.
I had a point I was going to raise under matters arising on the minutes, which didn't come up. So could I just, and it's relating actually to fundraising.
Yes.
So in the minutes, the last meeting in September raised the question of whether the Consultative Committee was going to see the report of the fundraisers that was done over the summer, to which we contributed a number of interviews, or whether that was going to happen or not. I don't know what the present status of that report is.
So I think that will be dealt. I mean, we can answer it now if officers want to, but I anticipate that's going to be addressed under item 5, item 6. But if it's not, the officers tell me it's not, Emily, then you can deal with it now. But I would have thought that's something you'd wrap up in.
I'm happy to just give a very brief answer, and that is that what we're going to do as a next step is analyse, because there's quite a lot of recommendations in there. So we're in the process of analysing all of the recommendations, and then putting together a plan for each of the charities with recommended options. So not all of the options are really viable or desirable. Some are more so than others. And to use that to feed into a fundraising plan for each of the charities. We're not proposing sharing the whole report with everybody, because obviously it's got some commercially sensitive information related to other charities. But what we're going to do is produce a summary report, and and that will include all of the key information. But also we'll be working on this, these options for each of the charities, which will feed into the business plan, and that will be shared with your committee for information and discussion and feedback.
Okay, and I should make clear we're proposing also to promote Hampstead Heath Ponds update before grant funding model, because there may be issues on the grant funding model that are in non-public session. And so just for the convenience, we don't want to go in and out. So we're going to deal next with the Hampstead Heath verbal update, and I think that's going to be from Andrew Impey. He's on online, and could I ask you, Andrew, first just to update us with the permission, the position on the ponds?
Yes, Chair.
So just before, sorry, Andrew, my attention has been Richard Summary has got his hand up. Is that to do with an earlier item, in which case we'll deal with it before? Sorry, Andrew, I've just got you all ready to go. But if it's not, then we can deal with it later. Richard,
it's a matter of,
yeah.
I don't know how, it's a new computer and I'm not quite sure about my picture. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You can hear. Okay, that'll have to do. I just wanted to raise the issue about the pergola, but if that's coming up later, I'm quite happy to leave it till then.
Yet let's deal with it's not down on specifically on the agenda. We will deal with it, but let's deal with the ponds so that Andrew can report on that, and then we can release Andrew.
Okay, that's fine.
But Richard, I won't forget that. Thanks. Andrew.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I like the sound of being released. The update's very brief. So the consultation closes a week tomorrow at midday on next Tuesday. The responses have really tailed off. So the main level of responses, and we got many responses, thousands and thousands, but it was very much at the start of the consultation. Those inputs have now tailed off. So it's a week before closure. We anticipate that it's going to take at least 3 or 4 weeks to do the analysis of that. We also have to do some focus groups as part of this. So we will not be getting a final report before the end of the year, and it will be January before we have a final report that comes to those committees that will eventually make a decision on that. So that's really the update for you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Are there any questions to Andrew? Apparently, I need to give
I've raised my hand.
You've raised your Colin.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is a question for Andrew or for other officers to answer, but 2 points. First of all, we were told at the last meeting that there had already been legal proceedings begun to challenge, in fact, the process of that the corporation was taking to consult and not do anything until after the consultation. I wonder if we could just update on whether they did in fact take place and whether there's been any progress in relation to that. Secondly, because of the timing on all of this, Andrew, you mentioned focus groups. In what way is the Consultative Committee going to be able to provide some input into the outcome? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Colin. There has been development, but who's the best officer? There's been it's been adjourned for an oral for a rolled up hearing, Andrew.
Yep, that's right, Chair.
And so basically what that is for judicial review, it's a two-stage process. You need to get permission to proceed with the proceedings. So in other areas of law, I could sue someone, and even if the case is not arguable, I just bring it, and then the case goes through. You file your defence, but in judicial review proceedings, there's what's called a filter stage, and you need permission to proceed. And what has happened in this case is the judge has adjourned on the papers, as we call it. So not in open court, but just considering the written representations, adjourned it to open court. Yeah, and William's got the date to hand, 17th of December. And that's a what's called a rolled up hearing. So what will happen there is, instead of you having a hearing or on the papers for whether you've got permission, and then you come back, if you get permission, you come back on another day and argue what's called the substantive hearing. If you don't get permission, you can renew it, a kind of appeal to the Court of Appeal if it's an oral hearing. But we don't need to go there because the judge, I think it was Mrs. Justice Leven, who was chair of Camden Planning Committee one stage, and as a planning barrister, Will and I know her. Well, she was before she became a vet. She has adjourned it into a rolled up hearing, which means it'll all, so far as the High Court is concerned, it'll be done and dusted in terms of the submissions on the 17th. I would expect the judge to reserve judgment, i.e. not to give an immediate judgment, and have a nice Christmas mulling over the judgment. But that's just me speaking. So the position actually is we've got what's called a rolled up hearing, which means permission and the substantive will all be done in one case on the 17th. So it sort of speeds it up a bit.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's clear.
Yeah.
And the other point about how we might make an input into the outcome.
So in terms of the outcome of, when you say the outcome of the judicial review proceedings, or what the future policy is going to be having regard to the consultation. So that's obviously going to be a matter for the management committee, but because of the timing, I appreciate that it's difficult to sort of garner views. Andrew mentioned focus groups, so I'm just wondering what the process is going to be. That's a very good question. So the position on the consultation is that the judicial review is a challenge against a corporation-wide policy. So although all the focus is on the ponds, the policy, and I'll be corrected by officers if I've got this wrong, but the policy in question applies across all corporation facilities. So I'm summarising it briefly, but the policy on whatever of self-identification across all policies, its application to the ponds is the particular challenge. So that does engage us a bit more. But the consultation, as you know, is being run effectively as a policy decision, and being funded on that basis rather than out of our pot.
Yes.
So that no, I haven't finished yet. No, so you're going to say, what does that? That's all very interesting and and good insofar as, I think quite importantly, it's not coming out of our charitable pot. That's just with a completely neutral to the outcome, but just the money is it's not coming out of our pot. What then happens? Now I'm not sure that a clear finalized decision-making process is being made, but my understanding that I'll be corrected, is that the role of the Hampstead, I'm just going to simplify and call it the Hampstead Heath Committee, but it's obviously Highgate and Queen's Park, is to advise the corporation on the running of the park, and also to carry out delegated roles that are delegated to us. Ordinarily, the running of the Heath is just delegated to us and we decide. On this occasion, obviously because it involves corporation-wide policy, they could delegate to us to make the decision. This is Common Council via Policy and Resources.
Yes.
And I don't know if a decision has been made about that, or, which I think is more likely, we would be in an advisory capacity, and I can see advantages of that because it's potentially a corporation. And we haven't discussed it, as far as I'm aware, in any detail, what our views would be as to whether or not we would want what we would want for the ponds, and whether we would want that as a distinct application that might be different to the policy used across the corporation. All those things are up for grabs. But Emily, you might Andrew, I don't think a decision has been made yet as to the actual decision-making process, has it?
No, we're currently working on that decision-making framework as we speak, have been working on it today. As you can probably well understand, it's quite a complex thing in terms of in what order things go to certain groups and what we're talking about, because there's obviously the corporation policy, there's the policy relating specifically to the ponds, there's also the equalities and human rights angle to this. So there's three things in train, and we have to make sure that they go in the right order to the right groups. So we're trying to sort that out at the minute and try and get the timings right. But what we need to know at the minute, or what we can be clear on at the minute, is that it closes next Tuesday. We will not be reporting to anyone until next year. When we have the final report, that final report will also be made public at the same time. So publicly it will be made available before a decision is made. But as I said, we're working on that decision-making framework, and as soon as that has been signed off by senior officers at the corporation, we can obviously make that available to committee members here tonight.
So, I mean, certainly as chair and deputy chair, the involvement so far has been at that higher, when I say higher level, on the corporation level, and then we'll await to see what the outcome is, and then we'll I'm sure, I can't imagine that it won't be a subject, whatever the outcome of the decision-making process will be, and this is even before we get to the decision. I can't imagine that we might not discuss that at Colin, at committee.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I appreciate that the management committee itself may simply be acting in an advisory role to policy and resources and common council.
Yeah.
But we also, as a consultative committee, would like to be able to input into that process, I think is what I'm suggesting.
Yes. And subject to what comes back, Andrew, from, I would have thought ordinarily that kind of would be the case, since this is a consultative committee on matters on which the, if I call it the main committee, decides or advises, then I know it would sound that we could be in the position where this committee is being consulted on to give its views as to what the main committee should advise or decide, depending on what it is. But on the face of it, I would anticipate, and again, I would, that this consultative committee would be consulted on this, because it's clearly an issue that relates to the Heath. It's clearly an issue which people are likely to have views on. It can't be described as a non-controversial issue of significance to the past. So I would anticipate that. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Could I then lastly, unless there are any points, thank Andrew. Sorry. Oh yes, you. Sorry. So I don't know if I have to give you permission to speak, William, but I do.
I think you're very. If you can give general permission. I just want to. I'm very grateful that the question has been asked about the timing, because obviously Andrew is having to cope with a lot of moving parts on this. It is fair to say we anticipated December the 8th, our main management committee would be the decision-making stage. It's apparently emerged, I have to say very recently, that's not possible. Partly, as we've just heard, there's judicial review, so there's legal proceedings that may or may not affect it. That's in December the 17th. But as I understand from what Andrew said, the sheer scale of the undertaking means December the 8th has no longer become possible. I'd say that is new. But we have a consultation committee on January the 13th and a family management committee on February the 3rd, which have always been long in the diary. And I think we need to know, even if it can't be answered today, maybe it can be, are those then going to be the decision-making points? Because I put the December the 8th in everyone's diaries of the main management committee to be a decision-making one. So we are obviously changing and adapting to what's possible. So I suppose my query would be, if Andrew, whether he can give us an indication when it is we can get a timetable that reflects the scale of the task as now understood.
As I said, Deputy Chair, we are working on that time frame at the moment. It would be based on the fact that we've still got a week to go, and there's still the potential to receive thousands, if not tens of thousands, of additional submissions. With these consultations, there tends to be a peak at the front, but also a lot of the time there is a peak at the end. If there were to be a peak at the end, it would then increase the time it takes to do the analysis. So I think it would be foolish and dangerous of me to commit to January 15th, not knowing how long it's going to take to do that analysis. Equally knowing we still have to see the results of the 6 focus groups and how they relate to the data, that's the quantified data as well as the qualified data. I did say at the last Hampstead Heath Management Committee that there was no way that we would reach the end of the year, and it would definitely be Q1. And I did state at the start of the consultation that it was highly unlikely, even on the time frame that we had, that the time frame was December 15th at the absolute earliest that we would reach anything. So I think I've always been clear right from the start, and certainly at the last meeting, that we were never going to hit a December timeframe. And also it would be, I think, dangerous for the corporation to rush this. We haven't rushed the process. We've made sure that we've done this as robustly as possible, and therefore, having done the best possible consultation that we can, I don't think we want to rush a decision at the end of the day. And also, I think it's also worth pointing out, just to reiterate, that this is not a referendum. Despite however the numbers look as part of this consultation, This is just evidence to support other things that we have to consider in terms of finances, in terms of logistics, in terms of many other things, in terms of what it's possible to do. So this is just providing us with additional evidence to give us more background information in terms of what we might do. So it's a proportion of that overall decision. It's not the decision in totality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, all it's going to be, all at the moment's going to come out is, well, Andrew, do you know when we'll know what's being put to us about the decision-making process?
Well, as I said, I've been working on this today, and the ambition is for us to get something to the executive director as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow with that, and then it will need to be signed off, because we need to be clear about not just this committee or the management committee, but it needs to go to probably SLT, it will need to go to ELB, it needs to go to various things. We need to get those dates agreed. So it will need to go up the chain to get that signed off. So I can't legislate for how long that will take to sign off. It might need to go to the town clerk in terms of how it lines up with Common Council and everything. So lots of moving parts. Apologies if I'm being vague, but we will get something to Katie and to the town clerk as soon as possible, and then it will be for them to decide whether they're comfortable with that time frame.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing to raise. If it's a matter of law as to who decides what, then it's a matter, obviously, ultimately the city solicitor advises on. But then if it's a matter of discretion or decision making, then it's going to be quite important, because you know, is it something that the town clerk as an officer, you know, is it appropriate for him to decide? If, for example, the choice is as a matter of law, that the consultative committee, Hampstead committee can make a decision, or can only act in an advisory capacity. There will be a decision, you know, there will be a decision as to whether the city is delegating a decision to Hampstead or not, and that would be a thing just to reflect back. Who makes that decision? Is it appropriate for it to be delegated to however senior an officer it is, rather than taken by the whole of Common Council, or even, you know, even Policy and Resources is just a delegated committee from Common Council, which is so. I don't, Andrew. I'm not asking you to answer those questions now, but I do think it's not just something that if it is a decision, that it can be assumed that it's one automatically delegated to an officer, however senior that they are, you know, they are.
I think we would also, in setting up the decision-making framework, we will refer back to the original paper that went to committee, that went to the management committee, that agreed this in the first place, in terms of what was agreed at that point. I haven't got that to hand, but we will refer to that when we set up that decision-making framework.
Yeah, that's right. But obviously, whatever was said before, it's got to be legally right. I mean, it doesn't. If we got it wrong before, then we don't stick to it just because that's what we had. Okay, thank you very much. I know. I'm sorry. Sorry to deprive St Lawrence Jury, but you've got my apologies. No, you're very generous. Thank you very. No, it is. Thank you. There we are. Could I just, if there are no more, are there any more questions on that issue? Could I just then thank Andrew? I'm sorry to lose you. I know you're heading off to pastures new, and I know I don't mean to cast any aspersions on the importance of what we've just been discussing, but I know it wasn't probably what you were anticipating, spending your time, given your professional interests and qualifications in various aspects of nature conservation. So can I thank you for all the hard work that you've put in to dealing with this tricky subject, and wish you well on your new role, which seems very exciting.
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully I'm around until the end of January. So fingers crossed, we may yet still have a final decision about this while I'm still here.
I could, well, yeah, I'll bet you something on that one. And yeah, good. No, we've not made it a condition that you're only released when we get a final decision, Andrew. Okay, thank you very much. So we can now go back to grant funding model and also the fundraising briefing, which was item which we swapped around. So that's going to be Emily, Jo, and Marguerite to present.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so I'm just going to give a brief overview, and then I'm going to hand over to Jo, who's going to talk about the work on fundraising to date, and then going to hand over to Marguerite to give some background and further information about the grant funding model. Okay. So the aims of this briefing are really to, again, sort of share much more information and detail with you about the Natural Environment Charity Review, particularly the income generation work and the grant funding model, to help build your understanding of the approach and the direction of travel, to outline the governance process, and really give you the opportunity to share your feedback in advance of this model going to, firstly, the Natural Environment Service Committees, but finally to Finance Committee for approval early next year. So the process so far has been that the principles have been reviewed by the Natural Environment Charity Review Steering Group and other internal stakeholders. So we've worked very closely with Chamberlains and with our legal colleagues on these principles. We've agreed a direction of travel with the co-sponsors of the project, and that is the Chamberlain and the Executive Director of Environment, and also with our Natural Environment Committee chairs as well. We're currently in the process of holding informal or member and consultative group briefings of this. This is obviously one of those briefings. And we will be taking the proposed model to an internal group called the Efficiency and Performance Working Party tomorrow. And that group has really got several members on it with a lot of experience in financial matters. So we hope to reap the benefit of their knowledge and experience. And then finally, we will be taking the grant funding model to our service committees in November and December this year. And they will be asked to recommend the proposed budget for 26-27 and also the grant funding model principles. And finally, the paper will be taken to Finance Committee for approval early next year. We'll also be asking for delegated responsibility for implementing the framework to the Natural Environment Charity Review co-sponsors, so to the Chamberlain and the Exec Director of Environment. So just to refresh your memory, we have three main aims of the Natural Environment Charity Review. So the first is improve governance, make sure that we're operating in line with Charity Commission best practice, but also that we're legally compliant. Secondly, to strengthen our operational framework, so make sure that we are set up to be able to deliver our operations successfully, and that includes reviewing kind of staffing across the natural environment charities. We're not proposing any major changes, obviously following on from the major restructure 2 years ago, but we are kind of looking at where there are potentially gaps and seeking to address those through this process. And finally, we are looking to really improve the financial sustainability and income generation kind of expertise and knowledge for the charities in order to make them kind of sustainable both in the medium and kind of longer term. So those are the main aims of the review, and there are 4 key work streams. First of all is the grant funding model. I will leave it to Marguerite to talk about the key areas within that. Income generation, Jo's going to give an update on that today again, so I won't go into detail on that. Asset management. So the third work stream is really looking at producing a comprehensive asset list, which we have now for each of the charities, which identifies the kind of ownership and any restrict of all of the assets, whether they're owned by the charity or whether they're owned by the corporation in its corporate capacity, but also what any restrictions are to use of those assets. So they could be, legal restrictions, they could be conservation designations, for example, but also looking at what the potential opportunities are, and also looking at whether the original reason for purchase of all of those assets, particularly for those that are owned by the corporation, and whether they're fulfilling their original purpose. Most of those were bought to support charity operations. Some, for example, Epping Forest, were bought to protect the forest from development and protect the rural nature of the forest. So does each of those kind of assets still fulfill its original purpose? What benefits is it bringing to the charity, and what opportunities and restrictions are there? So that's a very comprehensive piece of work that, again, Joe's leading on and is well underway. And then the last work stream is charity and internal governance. So, are we is the governance fit for purpose? Are we compliant with relevant legislation? Do we have clear governance frameworks? Do we have charity appropriate policies? So again, Jo will touch on this in her update section, but she's looking at things like, an ethical donations policy. We need to make sure that we have all of those safeguards and those policies and procedures in place to enable us to operate legally, but also in alignment with best practice. And finally, really kind of making sure that our members who are operating effectively as charity trustees clearly understand what their roles and responsibilities are, and that is all encapsulated within a handbook. So those are the four main work streams. Just moving on to the phasing, it is a very large and complex project, as I'm sure you're all aware from previous discussions and briefings. And for that reason, we are taking a phased approach. So the first phase is moving the funding of the operations, so what we call the local risk budgets, to a grant funding model. So previously, we've been operating in a deficit funded model, which is a very kind of local authority, very much an old-fashioned local authority way of managing budgets, where what happened, and again, probably I'm repeating things that you already know, but what happened previously was that the charities' budgets were set annually, based on income generation and expenditure from previous years, and whatever the deficit was, i.e., whatever the total expenditure was that the income generation couldn't meet, that was deficit funded by the corporation. So that the plus side of that was obviously the corporation met the gap. The downside was that if any any surplus brought in by the charities went back to the corporation. So there wasn't really any incentive to do a lot of income generation in that old model, and it also was very restrictive in terms of the inability to create reserves, the inability to to really kind of restrict and carry forward a lot of our funds. Obviously, some funds that are restricted funds, yes, we can, but we couldn't actually do that ourselves and designate funds. So that's the kind of current phase we are in. So Epping Forest and West Ham Park transitioned to that model in April this year, and the remaining charities will move to that model in April next year. It has been so far really a lift and shift kind of exercise. Marguerite will again go into this in more detail in her presentation. So there's been no effective change so far. Again, she will cover that in more detail in her section. Now, the rest of the charity-related kind of funding streams, so for example, the budgets managed by city surveyors, are more complicated because actually, there's more work that's required in order to change the kind of corporation's wider governance processes and to de-risk, the transferring those budgets to the charity. So what we don't want to do is take on a big liability or risk at this point in time. We want to make sure that actually city surveyors are addressing that big kind of maintenance backlog, so that when those budgets are transferred over to the charities, it is much lower risk and we're not taking on a significant liability. So we are working with city surveyors in order to support them to carry out the backlog works, and there's a really large programme of backlog works that that are being carried out now and will be carried out for the next couple of years. And we will be gathering during that kind of transition period, we'll be gathering data on that. We'll be working closely with them. We'll be making sure that the work is carried out to a good standard, that that backlog is effectively addressed before we recommend transfer of that budget, the ongoing maintenance budgets, to the charities. And equally, there's other kind of funding pots that the corporation holds as an organisation that we will continue to want to bid for, so transformation funding. But again, that needs further work, and things like corporate recharges. Again, we're doing a lot of work at the moment gathering and analysing information on those corporate recharges, and we'll be looking at actually implementing a service level agreement type approach where we're really kind of clear on what services we expect, and ensuring that we get value for money, and then potentially looking at other ways of delivering those services as well as part of this. But again, those work streams are complicated, and they will require sort of more analysis, more preparation, more planning. So that was all I wanted to say on the overall approach, and I'm going to hand over to Jo now, who's going to speak about the fundraising feasibility report. Jo.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, as Emily's already said, we've carried out a feasibility report through the Transform Partnership to look at our current state of fundraising across the 8 charities and what steps we'd need to take to grow that further. And thank you to everybody that was involved in that piece of research. We've had that final report sent to us. It is said it's quite detailed, and a lot of it's quite internal. And we'll be looking forward at an action plan based on its recommendations. But the main recommendations fall into 4 main themes, which first of all is governance and management. And I'll come to each of these in a little more detail. Identity, systems and skills. So as far as fundraising for governance and management, there's quite some in-depth look they've taken at our current structures. Now, bearing in mind that they were taking the attitude of looking at more traditional charities as you and I would know them, and really overlaying that format onto the charities as they exist in the City of London context. Some of their recommendations might not be possible or desirable with the way that we're set up as part of the City of London family, but it is still very important to take into account when we're considering those governance developments within the Natural Environment Charity Review as a whole. The charity review's got significant streams and resource put onto governance already. So for this part of the presentation, I'm going to be parking that there and just saying that those efforts and that work will continue, but bearing in mind those recommendations from that from the fundraising report. Sorry, I should have said right at the beginning, when I'm talking about fundraising, I'm talking about philanthropic fundraising, which is the traditional areas of giving, which might be donations or sponsorships or grants, partnerships, and all of those various different things. The charities themselves, many of which are already quite mature in terms of the more commercial elements of income, which might be car parking or sports facilities or licensing and some of those other areas. We're looking wholly at the philanthropic elements as we're going through here. The first real one that I think we're already quite focused on is identity. When you come across any of our staff on sites, you'll notice that they have the City of London crest emblazoned on their chest. It doesn't actually mention on our uniform that we're charities in any of those areas. It's our headed paper, it's our website, it's our signage and all of those things. Primarily, we identify as the City of London. And you may notice on some of our more recent signage, we say registered charity in very small letters underneath. That really needs to be turned on its head. If we need people to understand that we're a charity, that we are worthy of their support, and the nature of our financing and the need for that support, both in kind and in financially, we need to be promoting ourselves as Hampstead Heath charity, as Epping Forest charity, as any one of these, first and foremost, and that is going to be quite a significant change, and really one that's generational in many cases, because people just that's going to be quite a slow element. But it's also important when we're talking to potential fundraisers, particularly grant giving organisations. If we're applying to a grant, we're identifying ourselves as the mayor and commonality of the City of London. That doesn't step us off on the right foot of saying we are a charity and we need these things. A large amount of explanation needs to go into as to why we're even applying. So identifying ourselves in those kind of terms as Hampstead Heath charity needs to be done. So that in some ways is going to be kind of working up our current look and feel, be it that logos or various other things, but in some cases it's what do we actually even call ourselves on some of these pieces of work. Then we get on to systems. Thank you. Systems, again, I'm talking in some ways quite specifically, in some ways quite broadly. I think one of the key systems in terms of electronic systems is a CRM tool. So if you phone up any call center or any modern organization, they'll be taking down your details. They'll be able to see different members of staff, be able to see what you spoke about over the phone, so you don't have to repeat yourself the next time you call. We don't have that. Epping Forest is the only one of the 8 charities that has an existing CRM, and that we know has also got faults and we need to improve it. So we're working hard to find a useful tool that we can use just even to keep our business as usual going, so that we know the contact details of those we work with. If you raise that there's a fly tip or a sign that's damaged or any of those things, we know who called and we can get back to you. And we've got the record of what happened as a result of that. But in terms of fundraising, CRM is also an extremely powerful tool for understanding who our potential funders are, what our relationships with them are. If you are interested in a particular campaign, be it about the pergola or be it about the ponds or any of those things, we can make sure you get those tailored bulletins. And we also can process donations or payments and apply gift aid to those where applicable. I'm talking about 2 quite different systems here. They both exist. Finding one that can do both of those things is the challenge. But also more broadly, when I'm talking about systems, I'm talking about some of our internal processes, and that might be in terms of our procurement policy or our relationship with other parts of the organisation, and making sure that we're getting the value from those and the relationship with those supporting agencies within the organisation that are suitable for a charity. So again, using these things quite broadly. And then the final element we've got is skills. You've just met Susanna. She's the first recruit in terms of fundraising at North London Open Spaces, and that's not 100% of her role. We also have a small part of one person at Epping Forest who's got fundraising in their job description. Fundraising is an inordinately specialised skill, and the market for recruiting good fundraisers is very, very competitive. And they also can be highly specialised in terms of themes, so be that people working with high net worth individuals or grant founding organisations, or setting up legacies, or dealing with any of the irregularities that may come up as a result of some of those things. So we are planning on recruiting more, but what that might look like, we don't really know yet. What kind of skills as a whole team might make, again, we're not sure yet, but we're working on it very quickly, and we're likely to start recruiting a good senior all-rounder to look at plans across the whole of the 8 charities together and help us knit together what a team like that might look like. All of these items I've spoken about are going to require transformation funding. The charities themselves are not in a position to financially make that leap for any of these things. So we need to apply back to the city for some support over the next few years to establish and grow each of these areas. But one of the last things I want to draw your attention to is the last bullet I've put on this slide, which is it's very, very clear to us, and something that's dear to all of our hearts, that every one of the sites has got its own individual nature, its own needs, constraints and opportunities. We need to make sure that what we're doing is appropriate to each one of those sites as individuals, but also working as where we can together as 8 different charities to learn from one another, where there's good practice in one, extending it to others, and making sure that we've got those policies, procedures and systems that support all of them together. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Jo. My name's Margaret Jenkin. I'm the interim finance transformation lead working with the finance team and natural environment team in the Natural Environment Charities Review. So I'm just going to give a little bit more background on the grant funding model and the transition to that from the current deficit funding model. So as Emily said, the current deficit funding model is a local authority construct, and it is actually restricting the natural environment charities from building up those reserves and operating in a more effective way. Currently, any surplus or underspend against budget is held by the city as part of that process, but by the same token, there is risk and reward in that relationship, in that any overspend is funded by the city at the end of the financial year automatically. That kind of model isn't really charity best practice, and it does inhibit effective long-term financial planning. There is an over-dependence on cities' estate funding, and by that I mean there is a reduction in the diversity of funding. So a public sector and all charities and within the public sector have the same challenge at the moment of diversifying their income streams to ensure that they are resilient for the future. There's a lot of competition for funds, fundraising for commercial income as well, and that diversity is really important to the charity's future to be able to deliver better and more. The deficit model doesn't encourage that value for money, business effective approach, as Emily touched on earlier.
Sure. They are showing, so I don't know what the problem is. Sorry, is this? Yeah.
Yeah, they can see them.
Carry on. No, it is showing. So
sorry. So the grant funding model at the moment, you'll probably be aware that all of the charities have a different potential in terms of income generation, but each of them have that challenge of diversifying funding for future financial resilience. What the grant funding model does is it really is reframing the existing funding to put it in that style that's more typical for charities. In some ways, very simply, you've got income and expenditure, so you can actually see what the surplus or the deficit is. At the moment, things are rather hidden in that local authority city speak. It's really difficult to see whether there's successful performance. So we've been tackling that. And one of the things in terms of establishing a grant that we're discussing, we'll talk about a bit more later, is we're recommending that there is a grant period of say 3 years with updates in the subsequent years to reflect inflationary uplifts or efficiencies or developing economic situations. But really we're looking for a grant period that enables the charities to have that stability to financially plan. It should be reiterated that Cities Estates Fund, you'll be aware, has significant pressures upon it, and at the moment is relying on annual deficits to draw down on the financial and property values of the estate, and that could impact on grant funding in levels in the future. So this process is about ensuring the sustainability in the long term for the charities. Oops, I've gone backwards, I think. Have I stopped sharing now?
Oh, it's still sharing.
Sorry, it's just disappeared from my screen. Let me go back to it. There we go. It was easier when I was doing this for Jo, actually.
Yeah.
Let's do it this way. So just as a brief overview, this graph shows the 8 charities and is showing the proportion of what will be now termed grant income compared to self-generated income in 25-26. So you could see there for Hampstead Heath, the second bar here, that 60% of income for Hampstead Heath charity is from the grant and 40% is from self-generated income. Now that's a combination of trading income, fundraising income, and also the endowment income. But you can also see that for the other charities, there isn't that same proportion. So if we take Hampstead Common as an example, Hampstead Common is 94% funded by the city with only 6% self-generated income, but the potential for that, there's no car park, for example. Each of the charities has different circumstances, different personalities, and that has to be taken into consideration as we're developing this model. This is a slightly more detail there showing that balance between fundraising, trading and other income. So for Hampstead Heath.
Just clarify the last thing. It's 25, 26. So this is all predicted, is it? Because we've had part of 25, but we haven't had 26.
Yes, and currently the forecast is as budget for 25, 26. So it's based on that information.
Okay.
And 25, 26 forms the basis for the 26, 27 budget, which will be reframed with the grant in mind to make sure that the charities break even. So within Hampstead Heath, you can see in orange there, that's the investment income. So Hampstead Heath is the only charity with such significant investment income. So moving on, very busy slide, apologies, but just to sort of pull together, you know, there are risks and challenges associated with moving to the grant funding model, but there are also opportunity and potential for rewards. So just very briefly, charity responsibility for meeting deficits becomes something that to be met from reserves. However, the charities have that opportunity to build reserves and to absorb and hold on to any surpluses. There are pressures on the grant, so diversifying income is and keeping those reserves, building reserves gives financial resilience to the charities. It is going to take time, as Joe touched on, to develop the foundations necessary to get that full potential of income generation in terms of fundraising. But the whole process, actually setting up a grant, will make the charities more attractive to funders. It will explain what the relationship is, which is specific to the city of having two roles as a sole trustee, but also as the grant funder. And I'll come on to a little bit of that, of how we'll prepare and proposing to document that. So we'll have we're putting in place through the charities review effective systems and processes. It's going to generally improve the business effectiveness of the charities and their commercial maturity, and it will help make the charities more self-determining in making those decisions, as well as upskilling people within and bringing new skills and new roles into the charities themselves. One of the important things to mention here is also around external perceptions. So there is a risk that the grant funding model is viewed as a cost-saving exercise rather than embedding the sustainability. And one of the challenges will be to present this in the opportune way that this is a really positive move for the charities to be able to operate more effectively. Slide. So in terms of the foundations for that move, as Emily touched on, all charities will be moving to that model from 1st of April 26, pending discussion of the principles and arrangements. The local risk element, which is the operational element, will be referred to as the core grant in that, and effectively that's allowing the charities all to break even. And then the additional, what we'll refer to as the additional grant, all the other aspects like the CWP, so the Cyclical Works Programme, corporate recharges, all those elements that the charities do not have direct budgetary control for at present will be fully funded, equal and opposite. That would be the proposal, so that there isn't any risk. And then gradually through the next phases of the charity review programme, we'll be looking at bringing other elements into the core, or into the core grant to give the charities more flexibility. The grant funding model itself is proposed to be documented within something called a framework document. That's a familiar document to other charities that are funded by government. The framework document is a Treasury template, but we've significantly adapted that for the uniqueness of the city situation. But it will clarify and be very transparent about the arrangements of what the grant is for. It is also a public document and intended to be shared on the city's website. It will be available then to give reassurance and confidence to external funders so they understand that relationship. It's also clear there needs to be that transition period. So the first grant we're proposing would be a 3-year grant, but that's still, as I say, under discussion in the principles and arrangements. But that would allow in that transition period to be building all the foundations that need to be built to give the charities including transitional relief, so that we make sure that we've got the bedrock for that transformation. Just other elements to mention, we've aligned the approval process for the principles and arrangements with the budget 26-27, so hence the timing of it, which has caused us a few challenges. This presentation is very much about the direction of travel for the grant funding model, but there is a paper coming to natural environment committees and to be shared with you in brief in this presentation about the principles. So we're trying to get that process so that we're ready when it goes to Finance Committee in January. So you have the budget set in the new grant format. We've had to work quite a lot, as I mentioned earlier, on the charity style reporting. So the development in the background is so that all the management reports, the committee reports will be in a charity style now to make it easier to follow and easier to understand performance, and not just for the year-end annual report and financial statements, which has caused a few problems in the past. There is a need, because this comes with risk and reward, to develop a very clear reserves policy. There has been no need for that at the moment because of the deficit funding model, but we will need to develop this reserves policy. It's something that is required by the auditors and recommended, but also to be put into the annual report and financial statements. But this gives confidence as well to future funders about the charity's financial resilience. So this is just a slide that it sort of reiterates what Emily was saying earlier and fleshes that out a bit. So in terms of timing, you can see in the rest of this financial year, we're working on putting through the principles and arrangements, getting approval for those in line with the budget, getting the framework document agreed and published, and starting to look at scenario modelling for the future. So what is the potential for income generation, be that trading, fundraising, etc. And then moving into year 2, we'll be fleshing out those additional cost items and looking to develop SLAs so that we can really get under the skin of what those costs are. And that's it on the direction of travel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'll put forward to the members of the consultation body any questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's a lot of information, and I may have got a few things wrong, but one thing that comes up that is really a question for Joe and a question for Marguerite is, who now under the charity that is Hampstead Heath will control the resources? So for Joe, the endowment, who decides how the endowment is going to be spent? Now, once the charity is established, and then for Marguerite, my other question was more about commercialization. Who makes a decision about commercial activities if the philanthropic ones are going to be, we've discussed, but we haven't talked about commercial activities. I haven't quite grasped who the Heath charity is in terms of decision-making with respect to finance.
What I probably should reiterate is that the governance structure isn't changing. So the governance remains as it is at the moment. This is about the grant funding model reframes the relationship between the city as trustee and the city as grant funder to enable and give confidence to external funders to want to get involved. So it's building that income potential, but the actual responsibilities remain with the Hampstead Heath, Highgate Wood and Queen's Park committee process. All of that remains the same. We're working within the existing government structure. In terms of the income generation for any charities, really, there's that sort of 3 prongs normally of some sort of grant funding to varying degrees, fundraising income, so the philanthropic element, which could be anything from small visitor donations to high net worth trusts and foundations, the big stuff that we need this in place to be able to really to open up that possibility. And then the final tranche is the commercial income, so trading income, which is generally unrestricted. So that's things like cafes or car parking, that type of stuff. So yeah, so there's 3 elements really that this will encapsulate, which is a very standard charity funding model.
Right. I think I understand. If the Heath gets a certain amount of grant, it can decide how to spend that grant.
Correct.
I presume that's the superintendent of the Heath gets that role on commercial activities, or but do they also have access to how they spend the endowment?
So the endowment is the endowment income. So if you go back, if I went back to the graphs, you can see the different types of income. So that's all part of the budget planning process. So when we're looking to ensure that there's a break-even budget in year operationally, which is critical for any charity, the endowment income is part of the income that's taken into account in terms of breaking even.
But how it's spent will be whose decision?
So how it's spent is part of the budget setting process that goes through that normal governance of natural environment service committees through finance committee. The city's finance committee acts both as the charity's trustee and also as the grant funder, so it has a dual role that we're trying to clarify. So that's really,
Thank you.
it's an unusual one. I haven't been in this.
It is indeed. Thank you.
I've just got a question. I've got a question. Are we confident in terms of when we look at year zero and the element of fundraising that we will have, given that, as has been explained, this is a new development and probably going to have to recruit as well to move to having fundraisers and maybe a new logo, I was thinking when you were saying for Hampstead, so that we could identify it. Are we confident that the assumptions made on year 0, 1, 2, and 3 of the externally raised funding are robust?
So the baseline is really important to make sure that the charities have the best starting point and they're not sort of being set up to fail in any way. So taking 25, 26, where although there's been a lot of, there is fundraising activity and the charities have been working on that, we're taking that as the level. So we're not putting any of the assumptions on growth in the fundraising income into this first transitional grant.
So it's where then, sorry, where then does our fundraising come from, because we might get the odd amount of money, but maybe I swear that it's so
this
it's a green, isn't it? The green.
So Hampstead Heath is here. So the blue at the bottom is the core, what will be the core grant. The red is the additional grant. That's all the other elements like corporate recharges, CWP, which is a really, which is a significant amount at present. There's a little bit of fundraising increase income in the green, and
that's it. Unfortunately, it's just by a line on the mark, which almost blots it out on that one. EF is, just remind me, EF.
Epping Forest.
Epping Forest, who've got
Epping Forest, Hampstead
much
Heath.
more than us on the green.
Yeah.
So just to respond on that, they have quite a number of countryside stewardship grants and woodland management scheme grants,
right,
which we don't, but it is something that Bill is looking into and the team is looking into.
Okay.
And then obviously Hampstead Heath, Highgate Wood and Queen's Park have a lot from trading income, for example, the ponds income, swimming income.
So swimming, no, well, I'm just looking at fundraising though, the green. Does that include charging for swimming?
That's in trading income. That's the purple block.
That's the what block?
Purple.
Purple block. Yeah. No, I'm just talking about the green. I know it's small, but
so this is the low, the relatively low stuff.
Yes, I just don't even know what it is. That's what I'm saying. What is it? Because we don't have any tradition here of people dying, leaving money, or we don't have much of a tradition of people doing charitable fund runs and things for the Heath.
So there have been some charitable donations.
So where do they go?
So,
we tried setting up an account. We set up an account.
So I think this slide, well, it's intended to be the unrestricted element. So there are some small donations coming from visitors, for example, which is in an unrestricted way. But there are bigger grants. They're restricted grants. So where we are asking for money for, be it the countryside stewardship scheme or other elements, that is restricted for that purpose. So the baseline grant will not take those into consideration. The baseline grant, the core grant, will be set on unrestricted fundraising. Okay. And therefore it doesn't put the charities at risk.
No, I can see from that basis. I just wanted to, we're assuming almost nothing. I don't know how it's almost nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So it's quite difficult now to see with the hands up.
Just stop sharing.
Richard summary. This is separate to your other point on Pergola or Pergola, or maybe it is. Richard, do you want to go?
Yes, please, I will. So a number of points I want to make. Firstly, it was said that the restructuring that was done 2 years ago is not going to be tampered with. One point that I keep on making, and that I raised again at the last meeting, and people seem to agree, is that one of those one aspect of the restructuring was on the constabulary, and it's abundantly clear, it seems to me, that there is not sufficient resource there. So I just want to know whether or not there will be any kind of reconsideration before the budget's set next year, and it'll be a 3-year budget, because if it's a 3-year budget that doesn't alter that in any way, shape or form, or can't, then that's going to be, I think, a real problem in respect of safety on the Heath and the perception of safety on the Heath. So that's my first point. My second point is that whenever any discussion is made about fundraising, there is, in my view, and I've had many years of this, I've chaired and I still chair charities, generally an optimism bias. And there will be expectations about fundraising, which in this climate in particular that exists now and exists on the next few years, will exist in the next few years, it is going to be more and more difficult, because all charities are finding it much more difficult to raise money. Thirdly, there are, particularly for major capital projects, that there is often a requirement for having some matched funding. And I'm just wondering whether or not that has actually been considered in respect of, for example, the pergola, but there may be other issues where there is applications being made, or are the charities going to be left themselves to raise that sort of resource and therefore not particularly have access to match funding? Fourthly, I actually accept the point that has been made about having a reserves policy. That's always important, and usually in charities, it's based on 3 months, could be 6 months running costs. And I just wonder how long it's expected it would take before there would be sufficient monies in the reserves that would match the policies. Because otherwise there's going to have to be some kind of either grant or some kind of means by which the city is going to be able to enable a reserves policy to be properly implemented. And then the last point I want to make at the moment is, and it's not to, I mean, I appreciate that it's going to be implemented, and I'm not arguing about that, but I still want to make the point about the fact that the way in which the governance is set up, it's the corporation that's in effect passing this over to a charity. The decisions in the charity are made by the corporation. So for me, it's a circular argument, and I still don't accept the fact that people will think that it is going to be a charity entirely separate from the corporation, and that will make the development, in my view, of the ability to raise money both very much longer term and actually much harder, particularly for an area like Hampstead Heath and the people that live around it, because they're very well aware of the involvement of the corporation in this. So those are the points I want to make on.
Thank you. I'll hand some of them over. Some people around understand the involvement of the corporation, but they don't all understand it properly. I had a conversation with someone, oh, you've got loads of money, we shouldn't be paying for anything. This is a fellow KC. You've got all the business rates from the City of London, you can just put them in there, which isn't the case in that sense. Rates we collect as a local authority are for the local authority area. And there are still people who believe that they're paying for it through their contributing through their council tax. That's not everyone, I get that, but there is still a lot of that understanding. So, but I take your point, Richard. You know, whatever happens, people are still going to say, you know, why doesn't the Corporation of London pay for it? And ultimately, there is going to be a thing, you know, where you're going to get what, you know, you get what there is the money for at the end of the day. And, you know, and if people want extra things, and you're right, on the constabulary now, we are much smaller than we were before.
I can start and just to respond on that point, Chairman, and that is that I think just to qualify that what I said was we wouldn't be having another major restructure like we did 2 years ago, but we're certainly looking as part of this process to make sure that the staff teams are right sized and, you know, that any gaps are plugged. But I'm going to hand over to Bill now just to respond specifically on the constabulary.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. So we are completing interviews. We've done the first round to hire in 4 additional constables. You are right, that'll be a little bit less than half the original staffing of the constabulary. And I believe we have in the business plan to do a formal review at the 1-year mark once the constabulary is pulled up to its full current potential, to do a full review and see what the experience has been with that decreased level of security presence on the Heath and report back what the experience has been for consideration and discussion.
But on that one, sorry to interrupt, but on that one, if it's seen that there needs to be a considerably increased resource, which is what I would probably expect it to see, how would that marry with the 3-year funding that at the moment is being looked at by the city to provide, you know, starting before that review takes place?
I think there is provision within the model and the proposal for adjustments to be made and for a case to be made. But again, that would be subject to the right committee approval process, and we just have to provide strong evidence in support of any request for change, which is the review that Bill's talking about there. Yeah, we'd have to make our, as I understand, we have to make our case if we want the corporations put more money in for constabulary. We have to make our case for it. Look, I'm and Will, we've been big supporters and resisted you know, proposals that the constabulary go, but you know, there isn't going to be there isn't a great, you know, to use Theresa May's thing, there isn't a great money tree. But I'm not claiming there should be a great money tree. What I'm saying is that I think there are significant dangers, particularly in the point made about the potential over time of reduction in grant funding, that what will happen is there will simply be a reduction of resource on the Heath, almost regardless of what can be raised financially. And that is an easier way of abrogating the city's responsibility. And I just think there needs to be much more open about how flexible this particular model can be, particularly over the early years. Because I think the early years will demonstrate a number of different things about ability to raise money and about the future requirements of each of these open spaces. No, I agree. And look, we're fighting for it. But you know, how can I say, how many local authorities would be spending a couple of million on upgrading, you know, a running track for world record standards without any external funding? I mean, I think maybe, Richard, you know, I don't know, but I think, you know, you've only got to, you know, it's a thing that if we just say, I mean, it is going to be a risk, and I don't disagree with any of the things that you're raising. We just need to fight for them. But I don't think we're going to get any guarantees now from the centre that, don't worry, you can have X million or whatever for this, that and the other. No, I'm not expecting that. I'm really not. But I think you're right to be. We've got to fight for it. We've got to fight. But I think there's going. I've kind of been flagging this up. I don't know the outcome of these. You know, the ultra. But one only has to look at where the country is and everything.
to know that the days of things are changing. I'm afraid we're that's my feeling. I could be wrong. I mean, I want us to be able to find ways to build up the constabulary, because my instinct is, as yours must be, the Heath is being used more. This is anecdotal from me. We live in a society where people are more aggressive and unpleasant. I mean, I'm making sweeping generalizations, but this is what we're being told. So it's difficult to make a case that there's less of a need for a constabulary. But how we fight that case, I can't guarantee. Going into the most that we can be told is that we can make our case. We're going to be making our case to the corporation, and there are competing other cases being made as well. So we've got to make that case. A big issue at the moment, is our own housing stock, for example. We'll have to make, Goldhawk Road, and there's a big issue about that. So when we make our case, we'll be making our case like, I mean, when I'm here, I'm sort of saying to you, being Mr. Grumpy. When I'm going on, not being Mr. Grumpy, but when I'm going to the city, I'm finding, and as Will and I we're fighting to keep the funding for the track. It wasn't guaranteed through the process that Parliament Hill would get that funding. We were in a bid situation. So we do have to bid, and all the things that Richard raised are right, but we do need to have a major, both the corporation and our stakeholders, a major reset of the relationship, and that could cut all different ways. Yeah. Right, yeah, it's not so good where we can't see it. So I can't see the name. Ella. Colin first. Colin, you're first, and you've got priority. We can see you very well, but some of the others we can't for some reason, and we can't see Richard, but he's a big box.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Richard has said, and I don't think we've had an answer on the question about matched funding, so it'd be helpful to have an answer on that.
Yes.
But the question I was going to ask is what has been learned from Epping Forest and West Ham since they started this in April?
Good question.
I can give an answer on the match funding. Yeah. So I think we'll have to take that on a case-by-case basis. So obviously the preferred option, if we do apply for funding that requires match funding, is to secure that match funding from another source rather than use charity reserves. But I think a fallback position could be to use charitable reserves. But obviously that would be a last option, and we would look at things like applying to other internal pots. So the corporation at the moment has got a transformation fund. It doesn't have a huge amount in it at the moment, but there are potential internal options that we could explore. Equally, there is the option to secure match funding externally as well. So we will have to look at a variety of options and do it on a case-by-case basis.
I can add to that, depending on the nature of the project, it's possible that other interior pots, I mean, obviously by calling our grant funding, our deficit funding a grant fund, then that might be applicable to use as match funding for applicable applications. But if we're talking about the pergola as a good example, the city surveyor has some money set aside for work on the pergola under the cyclical work programme, and by calling that a grant also means that that is also applicable as match funding towards that project. So just by changing the name of some of the funding that we're already receiving lets us articulate and lets us leverage some of that match funding element that we weren't previously able to do so, really by just changing the name. In terms of what Epping Forest and West Ham Park have learned, we're in year one, and the largest part of the change is really becomes evident at year end. So it's been a case of really working out what it means for those charities as we're travelling through this year. But we'll probably be able to let you know more the other side of the 31st of March.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I've got another question. Just to add before I take, is it Michelle's? Is it Ella? Hampstead Heath, though, in this respect, is different. When it was taken over, it came with, albeit a dowry that would never match the costs, but nonetheless, the city took it on that basis. So it's not a standalone, in that sense, it's not a standalone charity as well. It's, in the sense of the city will always, it seems to me, has those responsibilities. So it's not going to be, and yeah, one can't see even looking at the chart that you could be in well, it's difficult that there is always going to be a substantial, it seems to me, city contribution, and that's part of its role as trustee. But anyway,
can I just chip in there, Chair?
Yeah,
I was just going to say thank you for making that point. Emily has said at previous meetings that principle, that ultimately the city is going to step in as a last resort, is still the case, and we have previously said that we hope that can be reflected in some way in the formal arrangements. So I appreciate it's too early to sort of say that, but the point you've made, Chair, I think is extremely reassuring, and I think we would hope that it will in some way be reflected in the overall arrangements when they're finalised.
I think the position is, as the position stands, unless there is a change, we are the sole trustee. We are the sole trustee, and we did take it, and Hampstead has this legacy investment that when it was taken over, I mean, it has been merged in with the city finances, not merged in terms of money, but just in terms of investment, so as to get a better return. But we do need to check that. But yeah, so it is. We do. I mean, we are the sole trustee, and I don't think there's any. And Emily's not getting away from that. I mean, I suppose it's stepping in as last resort is. Yeah, but it depends. I suppose it depends on what we want on the Heath as well. So it's not that there isn't going to be a Heath. Sorry, Ella, you've been waiting very patiently.
That's okay. My hand went up quite late in the day anyway, so I don't know whether it's a question or a bit of a yeah. We'll see. But so I completely agree with the need to move, and I can see the reasons behind the change in status and funding, and the need to be more sustainable. I guess my concern within that is how some of the community groups and the relationship with the community groups are preserved through the changes. I think there's a lot of work that goes on to help support the running of the Heath, and I sit here probably with a community sports hat on, but I see the work that Hampstead Hands, the Heath Hands do around conservation, and some of the work around education and outreach that they support. And I think, a lot of that's very vital and very important going forwards. So I guess in terms of some of the changes, and I can see some of the changes probably, I guess my concern is that they drive more towards chasing commercial relationships, and how that's kind of balanced with the need to keep the community groups engaged and working with the Heath going forwards, and keep things like inclusive sports participations sort of in the mix. So I think that's still important going forwards, and I guess my question is really how this will be safeguarded within these changes, and I guess the kind of yeah, the need to preserve some of the delicate ecosystem of voluntary support that goes on within this work as well.
So, Bill, if you just want to.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ellen. I could not agree more that the community groups on the Heath are extraordinarily important to the Heath. But I think it would be difficult to overstate, how much we value them. It's as you know, it's baked into our overall management strategy. A lot of the outputs and outcomes are devoted towards supporting community wellness, physical activity, sport, active recreation. That's certainly not going to change. And you'll know we do the fees and charges every year, and we benchmark that, and a lot of those are still significantly subsidized. We offer a lot of concessions, and I don't imagine that change